Hi, I'm Ben Connolly and welcome to The Unstoppable Photographer, the program designed to take your photography passion and help you turn it into profit. Conforming to the known rules of light and shadow will always give you the best results, but what if you want something more? What if you want to take a bold leap out of the nice comfort zone you're in and create something that's amazing? Well, when it comes to getting creative, there's literally no limits to this. If you can imagine it, then there's a pretty good chance that you can actually create it. When it comes to lighting a photograph, it doesn't always have to be done with natural light, a speed light, or an LED constant light. That's right, virtually anything or any device that emits light is something that you can use to create some kind of effect, whether intentional or not, in your photo. So this is the principle behind photography techniques like light painting, whereby you're creating the light in the photo with anything that emits light, and your sensor is then recording that light, thus creating the photograph. As well as using different forms of light and different devices like light tubes, sparklers, glow sticks, torches and stuff to create it, there's also the variable of how you use that light. What do you do with it to create something new, unique or different? How you choose to use the light you're creating is just as important and just as creative as how you created the light in the first place. On the following pages, I'm going to take you through a few different situations where you can get creative with light. The first situation is highlight against shadow. Now this one is as basic as it gets. Remember that the camera only sees in light, shadow, color, and contrast. Now, I'll often look for the darkest area in my scene and try to underexpose it to the point where it goes dark enough to frame my subject in. This does two things. One, it allows the subject to really stand out against the background, and two, it amplifies the overall scene, making the image much more visually appealing and stimulating. Silhouetting against highlights. Similar to highlighting against shadow, this is using shadow against a highlight. In the shot to the left, I didn't need flash because I had the sky, but in nighttime situations, I'll need a flash to give me a similar result, like the shot on the right. In the case of flash, I create that highlight by using the flash positioned behind the subject and illuminating something behind them or pointed at them directly. For these shots, I'll usually look for a dark or a simple area to silhouette against to maximize contrast. I will also oftentimes add a gel to the flash in a contrasting color to maximize color impact. Getting creative with white balance. This is when I use white balance and color gels to my advantage to trick the camera into introducing more color into the scene. Usually I put an orange gel on the flash and then set the camera's white balance to counteract the orange gel by introducing more blue into the scene. The end result is a neutral colored flash but blue ambient light, as you can see in the image to the left. You can also do this in the opposite way by adding a blue gel to your flash and setting your camera's white balance to correct the blue colored flash by introducing more orange into the scene with your white balance. Dragging the shutter. As we discussed, dragging the shutter is when you use a longer than normal shutter speed to allow for more ambience and use your speed light to freeze the motion. It means that you can freeze your subject while letting the rest of the frame blur. This particular style is great for wedding receptions where everyone is dancing and you have a beautiful ambience in the room, but want to properly expose your subjects with flash, but also want to preserve the ambience and keep everyone sharp. The way to achieve this look is to set your flash to rear curtain sync and utilizing a slower than normal shutter speed to capture the motion, and while that's happening, you have two options. You can keep your camera still, or you can move your camera, which will create some motion blur, and then at the end of this exposure, the flash fires and will freeze the motion. I tend to use a shutter speed between 1 second and 1/50th of a second and a couple of speed lights for dance floor situations. Shooting through lights, crystals, or glass. I often shoot through objects or lights to frame my subject kind of in a frame within a frame situation like we covered in the composition module. Usually when I shoot through something, I'm either looking for already lit items like candles or twinkle lights or fire, and then I'll light my subjects using another flash. Things like wine glasses, sparkly table decorations, and crystal filters give a really interesting effect. I mostly use shoot-throughs when 1. The venue is a little boring and I need something interesting in the shot, or 2. I want to amplify my frame as much as possible by hiding things that I can't move or using the light to frame my subjects. Backlighting and illuminating particles. Backlighting is when you put a flash behind your subject to illuminate them from behind. I do this often to highlight particles like rain, hairspray, smoke, fog, or bugs here in Australia. The method for this kind of shot is pretty easy. You simply place a flash about 6 feet behind your subjects. If it's the bride and groom, then place the flash at around the groom's shoulder height and point it at the groom, more so than the bride. Then slightly move your groom forward about an inch so that the light bounces off him to illuminate her. If you do it the other way, the light will bounce off her white dress and potentially overexpose both subjects. Reflections. Reflections are a great way to add interest and impact to a photo, and some can only be achieved with the use of flash or introduced light. Reflections present themselves in many different ways, and in some instances look like a double exposure. Some types of reflections are from the outside looking in. This is where you're outside looking through a window at what's going on inside and the subject in front of you, but you can see the reflection of what's outside with you. Second is reflecting the scene in front of you. For instance, a window beside you or still water at your feet, or by using a prism or a reflective surface to reflect the scene one or more times. Reflecting when the subject is behind you, like catching a reflection off a painting or a mirror or a glass frame that shows what's behind you. Shooting reflections can sometimes be challenging, but the one thing to remember is the closer that you go to the reflective surface, the more vivid the reflection will be. Focusing on a reflection can also be pretty challenging. Sometimes your lens will do what we call hunt and try to find focus. So in this case, it's much better to go to manual focus and focus the camera manually on your subject. What you can also do is focus on the real subject and then recompose the shot. Using a video light or a flash on your subject to brighten them will give you a more contrasty and dramatic result. Smoke, mist, powder or bubbles. The use of coloured smoke in wedding photography has exploded over the last couple of years, with so many photographers cracking out the smoke cans for something a little different, while bubbles have always been a regular way to create a wow photo. The key to shooting with smoke is to always ensure that your flash is behind the smoke. Sounds pretty straightforward, but if you get it wrong, you'll shoot yourself a wonderfully smoky, blown out frame, unless you've deliberately modified or reduced the light. The only variable with smoke is the wind, so if it's windy, then the smoke may not work so well for you. Make sure your flash is far enough behind the subject to illuminate the whole scene, and then crack out your smoke, making sure the smoke is behind the subject and won't drift away too fast. You'll probably also be needing some kind of light to illuminate them from the front unless you're doing a silhouette. In this case, I would use a light modifier like a grid to reduce the light spread from your flash. Not using a modifier like a grid will cause the light to hit the smoke and cause it to blow out. If you don't have any smoke, don't worry. Talcum powder or coloured chalk or a big can of deodorant also works really well. When shooting in the mist, it's a slightly different ballgame. The same principles apply to using smoke, but you'll find that the mist is everywhere, so you'll really need to reduce the flash spread to reduce the output intensity of the light so as not to blow out the mist and lose your subject in the photo. Light painting using flash. Now this is a pretty spectacular technique and an end result. Light painting has been one of my favorite creative outlets for a number of years now, and I've been very privileged to host training classes and speak about it in the US. Light painting is a photographic technique of moving the light source while taking a long exposure photograph to either illuminate a subject or a space. With light painting, you can also draw by moving the light around and drawing patterns. Recently, light painting has evolved with the creation of such tools such as the pixel stick, lumibrush, and light tubes, and even the fiber optic whip. What was previously drawings with a torch or sparklers has now grown into a worldwide obsession with amazing patterns, colors, and designs, now possible and quite easily achieved with a small amount of practice. Light painting can be done with or without using a flash, but the outcome very much depends on the skill level of the photographer and the subject's ability to remain still throughout the exposure if you're not using a flash.